Only broke women dress like that, my daughter sneered. But at the party, when I appeared, she went pale and fell. I didn't sleep the night I finished my daughter's wedding gown. I sat hunched over my old sewing machine until my back ached and my eyes burned, but I refused to close them. Each push of the needle felt like reliving a moment from her childhood. Every thread I pulled through the fabric carried a promise I'd made long ago. My daughter will never be without love, even if we are without money. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. The clock on the wall beat out the hours in a relentless tick-tock, as if counting down not just the night, but the years of my life. By the time the first pale stripe of dawn slipped through the window, the gown lay across my table like a small field of snow. It didn't shimmer like the dresses in glossy magazines, and it didn't carry the name of any famous designer. But it held something rarer. My sleepless nights, my sacrifice, the kind of love you can't buy. I wrapped the dress in an old clean sheet, hands trembling, and carried it across town to my daughter's home. Zuri was surrounded by her friends, all laughter and polished nails, sipping coffee from delicate china cups in a living room that looked like it had been torn from a lifestyle magazine. For a brief second, I felt nothing but pride. My girl had climbed higher than I ever could. Then she saw me. Her eyes slid over my simple clothes, my worn shoes, and finally to the bundle in my arms. "Is that the dress?" she asked, lips already curved into impatience. I nodded and smiled. Carefully, almost ceremoniously, I unfolded the sheet. The gown unfurled between my hands, ivory and soft. For me, it was years of struggle turned into cloth. Zuri stared at it for no more than a heartbeat. Her nose wrinkled. A small, cruel smile flickered on her lips. "This looks like something a poor person would wear," she said flatly. One of her friends choked down a giggle. Another turned away, embarrassed but silent. Before I could speak, Zuri grabbed the dress, lifted it as if it were contaminated, and tossed it straight into the trash can beside the kitchen island. "I'm not walking down the aisle looking like a seamstress, mother," she added, each word like a slap. The air left my lungs as if someone had punched me. My hands felt suddenly empty, my chest hollow. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in front of her. I simply lowered my head, gathered what remained of my dignity off the shiny floor, muttered a quiet goodbye no one heard, and walked out. Outside, the day was bright and hot, but I felt as if I were walking through winter. My eyes blurred, the world around me melting into vague shapes. All I could see clearly in my mind was the gown buried in garbage, crumpled just like my heart. By the time I reached my small house, my legs were heavy, my chest burning with unshed tears. I sat down in front of my sewing machine and stared at it for a long time. Its familiar hum echoed in my memory, but now it felt like the sound of morning. I laid my fingers gently on the metal pedal, as if it were the hand of an old friend. Something shifted inside me then. Not the familiar ache of sadness, something colder, sharper, and strangely calm. It was the kind of stillness that comes when a heart breaks so completely that there's nothing left to fear. Days passed and my phone never rang. No apology, no explanation. I heard from neighbors that the real dress had arrived, imported from Paris, perfect and expensive, the kind of gown people gasp over on social media. But all I could think was, perfection doesn't remember who raised you. It doesn't stay awake at night to mend torn uniforms or patch school shoes. One afternoon, unable to stop myself, I went back to Zuri's house. I waited until I saw her leave, laughing into her phone, her heels clicking across the sidewalk. When the door closed behind her, I slipped inside like a shadow. The smell of perfume, coffee, and fresh flowers clung to the room. In the corner, near the kitchen, the trash can still sat where I had last seen it. My chest tightened. I stepped closer and looked inside. Among folded boxes, food wrappers, and scraps of fabric, I saw it, my dress. Wrinkled. Stained. Tossed aside like a disposable napkin, but intact. I reached into the bin with shaking hands and pulled it out gently, as if rescuing a child from a river. I pressed the ruined gown to my chest and held it there, feeling the weight of years settle over me. At home, I laid the dress carefully on my work table. The evening light slid in through the window and spread over the fabric, revealing its scars, faint stains, torn threads, crushed pleats. Even like this, it was beautiful. It reminded me of a woman who keeps loving after every wound, bent but never quite broken. I ran my fingertips over every seam and felt my own story sewn into them. Every long night, every extra shift, every skipped meal so my daughter could eat. All there, hidden in the stitches. And in that moment I understood. This dress would not end its days in a trash can. For the next several nights, I closed myself in my tiny sewing room. I barely slept, barely ate. I only sewed. I added delicate lace along the neckline, beaded tiny crystal flowers along the hem, layered soft tulle like mist over the skirt. With each change, the dress became something new, something luminous. But I wasn't just decorating fabric. I was stitching myself back together. One stitch for every tear shed in silence. One bead for every sacrifice no one thanked me for. One flower for every day I had felt invisible. As the gown transformed, so did the woman bent over it. By the time I finished, the reflection in the mirror startled me. The sadness in my eyes had retreated, replaced by something stronger and quieter. The dress shimmered under the weak bulb of my lamp, but its glow was not about beauty. It was about justice. The wedding day arrived. I had promised myself I wouldn't go, but something stronger than pride pushed me toward the door. Perhaps self-respect, perhaps the stubbornness I had inherited from my own mother. I ironed my only decent cream-colored dress, pinned up my graying hair, straightened my shoulders, and stepped outside. I was not the same woman who had left Zuri's house with empty arms. This time, I carried nothing in my hands, but everything in my heart. The grand Magnolia ballroom glittered with chandeliers and white flowers when I arrived. Music floated through the air, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of glasses. Guests posed for photos in their best outfits, every corner carefully decorated for the perfect celebration. I stood by the entrance, unnoticed. Zuri stood at the center of it all, a glowing bride in a gown of imported lace that caught every light in the room. People swarmed around her, praising the dress, the decor, the groom, the event. Not one person asked who had sewn her first school uniform, who had mended her childhood. She didn't see me slip in. I stayed near the wall, half hidden behind a column. I wasn't ready to face her yet. After a while, a well-dressed woman with styled hair and a stiff smile approached. Her future mother-in-law, I guessed. "You must be Zuri's mother," she said, her voice polite and cool. "I am," I replied. "It's nice to meet you." Her eyes flicked over my simple dress, my old shoes, the roughness of my hands. "We're about to take family photos. Would you mind waiting back there? We'll call you if we need you." She gestured toward the edge of the room near the curtains, as if placing me on the outskirts of my own daughter's life. I gave a small nod and stepped back, becoming a quiet shadow once again. During the ceremony, I watched from the sidelines. People offered me distant smiles, but no one lingered long enough to talk. Zuri didn't introduce me to anyone. She barely glanced in my direction. It was as if acknowledging me might stain the image she had so carefully built. The music began, and the newlyweds stepped onto the dance floor. The guests erupted in applause. I clapped too, though my hands shook with a storm of feelings I couldn't name anymore. As I watched her, my child who once ran to me with messy braids and scraped knees, turn proudly in the arms of her groom, I asked myself a question I had been afraid to voice. At what moment did my daughter stop being my daughter? A young bridesmaid approached awkwardly with a tray of drinks. "Can I bring you something, ma'am?" she asked softly. "No," I replied. "I'm just watching." "Watching what?" she asked. "How a mother becomes invisible," I answered without anger, only tired truth. The girl didn't know how to respond. She lowered her eyes and walked away. Midnight came. The music was louder, the laughter looser, the dance floor crowded with bodies swaying under the colored lights. The moment had arrived. I rose from my chair and walked toward the middle of the ballroom. In my hands, I now carried a white linen bag folded with great care. The one holding the transformed gown. One by one, conversations died down. Heads turned. The DJ lowered the volume. A wave of murmurs rippled through the guests. Zuri saw me. Her face stiffened, annoyance flickering into worry. "Mom, what are you doing?" she whispered when I reached her. "Please, don't cause a scene." "I haven't come to ruin anything," I said quietly. "I've only come to take back what belongs to me." I placed the bag on a nearby table and opened it slowly, letting the moment stretch. Then I lifted the gown out into the light. Gasps spread through the room like wind across grass. The dress gleamed. The soft tulle, the restored lace, the tiny crystals I had sewn by hand looked almost unreal under the crystal chandeliers. It was the same dress she had thrown away, but it no longer resembled anything destined for a trash can. It looked like it belonged to a queen. Zuri took a step back, her face pale. What is that?" she stammered. "Your first wedding dress," I answered. "The one you called poor. The one you buried in the garbage." "But it's beautiful," someone whispered nearby. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, carrying farther than I expected. "It is. It always was. You just couldn't see it." I turned so everyone could see the gown more clearly. "This dress was not sewn with money," I continued. "It was sewn with nights I did not sleep, with meals I skipped so bills could be paid, with fingers that bled while I mended other people's dreams. Every stitch has my story. Every seam carries my name, even if no label shows it." The room was utterly silent. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Zuri's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please, stop," she whispered, her voice shaking. "No, daughter," I replied softly. "I stopped too many times. When you looked at me with embarrassment, when you asked me not to show up in those clothes, when you pretended not to know how hard I had worked to get you here. Tonight I'm not here to complain. I'm here to remind you where you come from." The first clap came from somewhere near the back. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the whole ballroom was applauding. Not for the groom, not for the fancy catering, not for the imported lace, but for a truth that had finally been spoken aloud. Zuri crumpled to the floor, sobbing. For the first time in years, her tears were not born from frustration or vanity, they came from recognition. I walked toward her and gently cupped her face between my hands. "There is no shame in being simple," I murmured. "Only in forgetting the hands that carried you." She tried to throw her arms around me. For a moment, every part of me wanted to hold her like I used to when she was little. But I moved back a step. "Not yet," I said quietly. "You still have to learn what love looks like when it doesn't dress itself in pride." I turned, lifted the gown in my arms, and walked toward the exit as the applause swelled behind me. Each step felt like a knot loosening inside my chest. When I crossed the threshold, I knew something had ended that night. I was no longer the mother who swallowed tears behind a sewing machine. I was a woman who had finally stitched her own dignity into place. Outside, the cool night air met my burning face. The gown shimmered under the moonlight, its lace catching the glow of the distant street lamps. There was no crowd, no music, just the quiet steps of a woman walking home with her head high. Back in my small house, I hung the dress where I could see it. It wasn't just fabric anymore. It was testimony. And buried deep inside its lining, hidden between layers of tulle and lace, were the secret notes I had sewn in on one of those long nights. Little folded pieces of paper, stitched into place with invisible thread. In one, I had written, "When you were born, I thought life was giving me back everything it had taken." In another, "I sewed your first dress with scraps and faith. I never imagined you would one day be ashamed of the hands that made it." And on the smallest note, the one closest to the heart, I had copied my mother's words. "The thread between a mother and her daughter never truly snaps. It just stretches until one of them finally decides to let go." I didn't know if Zuri would ever discover those secrets, or if she'd ever have the courage to unpick the lining. But I had placed them there because someday, when silence was no longer enough, I wanted my words to speak for me. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days after the wedding, there was a timid knock at my door. Zuri stood outside, eyes swollen, holding the gown in her arms. "Mom," she whispered, "I read your notes." Her voice cracked on the last word. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat in the same old chair where she had once waited for me to finish hemming her school uniforms. She placed the dress on the table between us, like a confession. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I didn't know how much you had given up for me." "Mothers don't keep a ledger of their sacrifices," I answered quietly. "We just keep sewing." "I treated you like you were small," she said. "But I was the one who didn't understand anything." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were proud. Pride is also inherited. Thankfully, so is the ability to learn." She slid off the chair and knelt at my feet, just as she had done as a child when she wanted comfort. She took my rough hands between her soft ones. "Forgive me," she choked. "You don't need to beg for forgiveness," I said. "You need to live differently." That was how the first real stitch of our new relationship was made. Not with thread, but with tears and truth. That night, she ate dinner at my table for the first time in years. The silence between us no longer felt like a wall. It felt like soil where something new might grow. Later, after she'd gone to bed, I folded the gown and placed it in a wooden box along with the remnants of old fabrics and the scraps from her 15-year-old blue dress. Before closing the lid, I slipped inside one last note. "When you read this someday, remember, humility is not something you are born with. It is something you choose. And today, you chose your first stitch." I closed the box gently and put it away. For the first time in a very long time, I slept without dreaming of trash cans. The days that followed were softer, but still fragile, like fresh stitches that could easily come undone. Zuri stayed with me for a while, helping around the house. She swept the floors, washed dishes, and sat beside me while I sewed. Sometimes she tried to handle the needle herself, pricking her fingers and laughing through the pain. Watching her like that, I caught glimpses of the girl who used to call me the best mom in the world, without irony. One evening, as we dried the last dinner plate, the telephone rang. I wiped my hands on my apron while Zuri picked up the receiver. Her expression changed almost immediately. "Yes, this is Zuri," she said carefully. Then her eyes flicked to me with unease. "Tomorrow evening?" "Yes. I'll tell her." She hung up slowly, the color draining from her face. "Who was it?" I asked. "Auntie Ellington," she replied in a small voice. "My mother-in-law. She wants to come for dinner. She says she needs to talk to us. To both of us." The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. I stared at the broken pieces for a moment before exhaling. "Then let her come," I said. "But let her bring honesty with her." I barely slept that night. Not from fear, but from the feeling that some old hidden seam in my life was about to rip open. There was something about that woman, the way she had looked at me in the ballroom, the way her arrogance trembled on the edge of something like shame, that gnawed at me. The next evening, I laid out a simple meal. Nothing extravagant, just what I always made: rice, vegetables, a bit of meat. I ironed a tablecloth that had seen better days and polished the silverware not to impress, but because my mother had taught me that self-respect doesn't depend on the wealth of the table. At exactly 8, the doorbell rang. Zuri opened the door, and Mrs. Ellington entered the house with the careful grace of someone still used to being observed. She wore an expensive coat, a ring that caught the light, and a perfume so strong it seemed to try to erase the smell of our small home. "Good evening," she said stiffly. "Welcome," I replied. "Please, sit." For a few minutes, the only sound was the ticking clock. Zuri fiddled with her napkin. Mrs. Ellington's eyes kept flitting from me to the table. "I suppose you don't remember me," she finally said, her voice lower than usual. "I remember many voices that once spoke to me from above," I answered. "Especially the ones that hurt." Zuri glanced at me, confused. Mrs. Ellington sighed, shoulders dropping. When I was young, she began, my mother had a seamstress. She was talented, precise, and fast. Poor, of course. She worked in the back of my mother's tailor shop. I treated her terribly. I spoke to her as if she were a machine, not a person. I complained about every stitch, delayed her pay, and sometimes refused to pay her at all. A chill passed down my spine. The shop. The harsh voice. The rich girl shook a dress in my face because I had left a hem 1 millimeter longer than she wanted. That seamstress, she continued, was you, wasn't it? Memories flooded back. The cramped workshop, the smell of fabric, the humiliation that had burned deeper than hunger. Yes, I said slowly. Your mother fired me one day for daring to ask for the wages I was owed. You were there. You called me ungrateful help. Zuri's eyes widened. You worked for her? I did, I replied quietly. Her mother taught me that some people believe money is a license to step on others. She also taught me that I would never let anyone step on me twice. Tears filled Mrs. Ellington's eyes. I knew it was you the night of the wedding, she confessed. When I saw you with that dress in your hands, standing there so straight, I recognized the woman I had once treated like dirt. But shame kept my mouth shut. Why come now? I asked. Because that night, something broke in me, she said. I realized I had spent my entire life admiring what you have and I don't. Dignity. I came to ask for your forgiveness. The room felt heavier, the air thicker. Forgiveness doesn't come just because someone says, I'm sorry, I replied. It shows in how you choose to live afterward. I know, she said quickly. That's why I want to help you. Let me fund your own sewing workshop. A real studio. Machines, space, students. I have more money than I know what to do with. Let me use some of it to build something you deserve. Zuri turned to me, astonished. Mom, you could have your own studio, she breathed. I studied the woman in front of me, the same one who once tossed coins at me like scraps. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell her she was decades too late. But another part, the part that had learned that growth sometimes arrives wrapped in unexpected hands, hesitated. I will accept, I said at last. But with a condition. Anything, she replied eagerly. The studio will be named after my mother, I said. She taught me every stitch I know. She deserves to have her name hang over the door. What was her name? Hope, I replied simply. Mrs. Ellington nodded, tears clinging to her lashes. Then it will be Hope Studio, she said. That night, after she left, Zuri hugged me with a smile I hadn't seen on her face since she was a teenager. You see, Mom? Life is finally paying you back. Life doesn't pay debts, I replied gently. It offers chances. It's up to us whether we take them or not. A week later, Mrs. Ellington returned with contracts and papers. She spoke of rent, equipment, and budgets, hands moving quickly across numbers and signatures. But beneath her eagerness, I sensed something else. What are you really rushing, Mrs. Ellington? I asked quietly. The studio, or your conscience? She froze. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the pen. There's something else you haven't said, I added. She swallowed hard. 30 years ago, she began, there was a young man working for my mother. Kind, quiet, hardworking. I fell in love with him, though I never had the honesty to say so plainly. His name was... She paused. Kofi, she finished. My chair scraped loudly against the floor as I shot to my feet. My husband's name was Kofi, I said. Kofi Bakery. Yes, she whispered. The same man. Before he married you, he worked in my mother's shop. I never forgot him. I didn't seek him out after he left, but the day he died, I heard about the accident and went to the hospital. The room spun around me. I arrived too late, she continued, crying now. He was already gone. But he had an envelope in his hand with your name on it. I took it. And I kept it. I was afraid. Afraid you'd find out I'd been part of his past. Afraid of what the letter might say. Afraid of facing the woman I had already wronged once. Zuri stared at her, stunned. You kept a letter from my father? Mrs. Ellington pulled a worn envelope from her purse, yellowed with time. Here, she said, voice shaking. I should have given it to you years ago. I can't carry this anymore. My hands trembled as I took it. Inside, in familiar handwriting, were the words of a man I had buried with more questions than answers. Afia, it began, if you receive this, it means life did not give me enough time to say what you deserve to hear. I made mistakes. Many. Before you, and even after you. If a woman named Amani ever crosses your path, do not hate her. She, too, was swallowed by the pride that swallowed me. Don't let my past chain you to anger. If you can forgive her, forgive her. For both of us. The letter fell from my fingers. Zuri picked it up, reading in silence, tears darkening the page. Mrs. Ellington sobbed openly. I have lived with this guilt for so long, she said. When I saw you at the wedding, I knew the time had come. Your husband was a good man trapped in a world of people like me. Let me do at least one good thing in his name. I drew in a deep breath. The threads of our lives, mine, hers, Kofi's, had been tangled together long before we knew it. If we open this studio, I said finally, it won't be to wash away guilt or pay off sins. It will be to teach other women that their worth isn't decided by those who look down on them. It will be a place for broken stories to be rewritten. Do you understand? Yes, she whispered. Then we will open it, I said. Not as a monument to our pain, but as a workshop for our healing. That night, after she left, I sat by the window with the letter in my lap. Zuri leaned her head on my shoulder. Dad loved you, she whispered. You can read it in the lines. Yes, I said quietly. He loved me, but he did not always know how to show it. People fail us in clumsy ways. That doesn't erase every part of their heart. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a soft sigh. Inside, some ancient knot within me finally loosened. A few days later, another envelope arrived, this time from a lawyer in the city. The name on the front was written in formal script. Afia Bakery. Seeing my married name after so many years made my chest tighten. The lawyer's letter explained that my late husband had left behind a small account and a private journal, kept locked away until some paperwork finally cleared. He had arranged it so that, if anything ever happened, I would receive them. It's from Dad? Zuri asked, eyes wide. Yes, I whispered. It seems he still had something left to say. Inside the smaller package was a worn leather notebook, corners softened by time. I opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Kofi's handwriting, sometimes neat, sometimes jagged, as if written in a hurry or in moments of turmoil. He wrote about our early days together, when we were both young and hopeful. He described my laugh, the way I bent over cloth as if I were taming it. He wrote about the tiny apartment where we had started our life, about the way I sang under my breath while I sewed. But further in, the entries darkened. He wrote about feeling like a failure, about not earning enough, about watching me be disrespected by clients and hating himself for not being able to stop it. She sews as if she is stitching the world back together, he wrote in one entry. And I stand here feeling like the tear that keeps ripping it apart. We read in silence, tears falling quietly from both our eyes. Near the end of the journal, the tone changed again. The lines were shakier, scattered, as if written in worn-out moments. If you ever feel completely alone, Afia, one page read, go to the old fabric drawer in our first home. Look for the red thread. You used it the first time you sewed a dress for our daughter. I kept it. When I see that thread, I remember why all of this was worth it. My heart clenched. The red thread. I remembered it, the strong, bright spool I had used when we could barely afford materials. That night, after Zuri went to bed, I dug through my old boxes. There, in the bottom of a worn carton, Under scraps of faded cloth, I found a tiny coil of red thread, long forgotten. I held it between my fingers and felt time fold in on itself. I saw myself young again, leaning over a small dress for a baby girl who smiled with toothless gums. I saw Kofi standing in the doorway, watching us with tired eyes but soft pride. When Zuri found me sitting on the floor with the open box and the red thread clutched in my hand, she knelt beside me. "That's it, isn't it?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. "He kept this all these years." She wrapped her arms around me. "Even when he failed," she whispered, "he still remembered what mattered most." In the days that followed, Mrs. Ellington came back to finalize the details of the studio. But thanks to Kofi's small account and the support of a few local women, I no longer needed all of her money. "We'll do this," I told her, "but not as a debt you pay. We'll do it as a partnership. Not of equals in wealth, but equals in responsibility." She nodded. There was no arrogance left in her gaze now, only fatigue and a humbled kind of respect. The day Hope Studio opened, the morning sun flooded our new space. It wasn't grand. The walls were simple, the tables modest, the machines second-hand but sturdy. Still, to me, it looked like a kingdom. A hand-painted sign hung above the door. "Hope Studio. Every stitch has a story." Women from the neighborhood came with bags of worn-out clothes and old fabric they thought was useless. Some just came with sad eyes and empty hands. I welcomed them all. "We're not just here to fix garments," I told them. "We're here to repair whatever life has torn inside you too. One stitch at a time." Zuri wore an apron and moved between the tables, teaching simple embroidery to beginners. She still pricked her fingers and swore under her breath sometimes, but she laughed while doing it. Watching her guide other women with patience made my heart ache in a way that felt almost sweet. In the center of the main wall, I framed the red thread in a small glass box. Underneath, I wrote in careful script, "In the end, every wound can close if you are brave enough to hold the needle with love." Weeks passed. The studio filled with voices and the soft rhythm of sewing machines. Women who once walked with bent shoulders began to straighten their backs. Some found work with the skills they learned. Others found something even rarer, a sense of worth. One evening, Zuri walked in with an official-looking envelope. "Mom, this came for you," she said. The sender was a local organization that supported women entrepreneurs. Inside was a letter. They had heard about Hope Studio and my story. They wanted to honor me at a city event for proving that strength and dignity can be built stitch by stitch. Zuri's eyes shone with tears. "They finally see you, Mom," she said, hugging me. "I was never invisible," I replied gently. "I was just working in the back room." On the night of the ceremony, I wore a simple cream dress I had sewn myself, the same kind I always chose. Nothing flashy, but cut with care. Zuri held my arm as we walked into a hall full of women whose lives had been reshaped by resilience. When they called my name, I stepped onto the stage and looked out at the crowd. "I am just a seamstress," I began. But a seamstress sees what others throw away and asks, "What can be saved?" Clothes, homes, hearts, it is all the same. No fabric is too torn to be mended if you have patience. And no person is too broken to stand again if someone believes they are worth the work. The applause lasted longer than I expected. It wrapped around me like a warm shawl. As I stepped down from the stage, I noticed Mrs. Ellington standing among the audience. Her eyes were wet, and she clapped as if she wanted each movement of her hands to say, "I am sorry. I am proud. I am learning." That night, back home, Zuri waited on the patio with her daughter, my granddaughter, Nia. The little girl ran toward me holding something between her fingers. "Grandma, look," she said, showing me a tiny piece of red thread she had found in the studio. "Can I keep it?" I studied her small, bright face. The thread glowed faintly under the moonlight. "Yes," I told her. "You can keep it. But promise me you'll take care of it." "Why?" she asked, puzzled. "Because that thread ties the women in this family together," I said. "When you hold it, You're holding all of us. She nodded solemnly and wrapped it around her wrist like a bracelet before going back to play. Zuri watched her, then turned to me with tears in her eyes. Do you think she'll understand someday? She'll understand when she has to sew her first broken piece of life back together, I answered. That's when she'll know the thread isn't just red. It's made of everything we lived through. Years passed quietly, the way seasons shift without asking permission. My hair turned completely white, my back curved a little more, and my hands collected tiny scars, thin, pale lines that felt like roads etched into my skin. Each one held a memory, a wedding dress, a school uniform, a funeral outfit, a first job suit. Hope's studio grew busier, but it never lost its heart. Women came from nearby neighborhoods and even other towns. Some had never held a needle. Others came with tears still fresh on their cheeks, clutching stained tablecloths or ripped clothes like talismans of an old life. Can this be fixed? They would ask. We'll see, I'd reply. Sit down. Tell me the story behind the tear. I no longer felt like I was just stitching fabric. I was helping people stitch themselves together again. Every morning, I opened the windows wide. Sunlight washed over the tables and bolts of fabric stacked on the shelves. The scent of cotton and coffee mingled with the constant murmur of conversation, laughter, and the soft clack of scissors. Sometimes I closed my eyes just to listen. It was the sound of work that no longer hurt, of days earned rather than endured. Zuri had now been working with me for years. The woman who once hated being seen next to me had become my right hand. She taught embroidery to anyone who wanted to make something beautiful out of plain cloth. Sometimes she still pricked her fingers and hissed through her teeth before laughing it off. Mom, she said one morning as she straightened spools of thread, I used to think sewing was just a job for people with no other choice. And now? I asked. Now I think it's a way of praying, she replied. A way of asking the world to hold together just a little longer. I smiled. Your grandmother used to say the same thing. Time, I realized, was repeating itself, but differently. The cycle of hardship and pride and shame had been broken and rewoven into something kinder. One winter, I received a call that Mrs. Ellington had fallen ill. Zuri and I went to visit her. She no longer lived in glittering ballrooms but in a large house that felt empty despite its many rooms. She sat wrapped in a blanket, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I knew you'd come, she said with a weak smile. I owed you a visit, I replied. Afia, she said softly, you saved me from myself. You don't know how many nights I lay awake wondering if I'd ruined too many lives to ever make amends. Then I saw Hope's studio, and I realized, some wrongs can become roots for better things. Her eyes shifted to Zuri. Your mother is one of those women who are born once in a century, she said. Don't mistake her toughness for lack of tenderness. It's what kept her from breaking. A few weeks later, she died. In her will, she left a donation for Hope's studio, not grand, but solid enough to secure its future for a long time. Attached was a small note. Thank you for mending, with the thread of forgiveness, what I tore apart with pride. I cried when I read it, not from grief alone, but from release. It felt like the final thing that needed stitching had finally been sewn shut. Back at the studio, Nia grew like a young tree in warm soil. She spent her afternoons running between the tables, asking questions, collecting fabric scraps. When she was old enough, Zuri began teaching her to sew. One day, I watched from my rocking chair as Nia, now with longer braids and surer hands, tried to thread a needle using that same red thread she had wrapped around her wrist years before. She pricked herself and flinched but then tried again. And again. Why do you like that thread so much? I asked her. Because it's special, she said. It reminds me that even if I mess up, something good can still come out of it. I leaned back, letting the sound of her soft laughter and the hum of the sewing machines wash over me. Sometimes people asked me, if you could live your life over, would you still go through all of it? The humiliations, the tears, the long nights alone at the machine. My answer never changed. Yes, I would say. Because every insult taught me not to kneel for love. Every rejection taught me the weight of my own worth. Every sleepless night reminded me that dignity is the only garment that must never be pawned away. When I looked at my scarred hands, I didn't see ugliness. I saw a map of all the lives I had touched without realizing it. Women who had walked into my studio shattered and walked out a little bit stronger, carrying dresses, tablecloths, or simply the courage to keep going. As the years went on, people started sharing my story. Someone recorded it. Someone else posted it online. Eventually, my life became a tale told in other people's voices. A story about a dress in the trash, a mother's broken heart, and a red thread that refused to snap. One quiet evening, sitting alone in the studio after everyone had gone home, I decided to write it all down myself. Every chapter, every tear, every needle prick that had brought me here. When I finished, I looked around at the empty chairs, the folded fabrics, the machines resting in silence. If you are listening to this story now, wherever you are in the world, know this. You don't need money, fame, or perfect words to matter. You just need the courage to pick up the needle again after life cuts the thread. If this story touched you, tell me where you're hearing it from. I imagine all of you like small lights scattered across the world, each holding your own torn fabric, wondering if it can be saved. It can. If you wish to support stories like mine, do it in whatever way you can, by being kind to the seamstress, the cleaner, the cashier, the tired woman on the bus clutching a bag that holds her whole life. That is how you help me keep telling stories, by changing the endings of your own. On the screen in front of you, there are other life stories waiting, each with its own thread of pain and hope. If you want more, follow along, come back, listen again. As for me, my hands are slower now, my stitches a little less straight. I know that the last seam of my life is almost complete, but I am not afraid. The red thread lies warm across my lap, as if it still hums with the laughter and tears of 3 generations of women. Just before I close my eyes, I can almost hear my mother's voice whispering from somewhere beyond the fabric. You can rest now, daughter. The final stitch is done.